Well, hello, and welcome to our online confirmation. Today we're going to be talking about King Solomon. Maybe you've heard of him before. There are stories. So, Solomon is the son of King David. He's the third king in the line of succession in the Israeli kings. Saul was first. He got replaced by David. Remember, David had that affair with Bathsheba, and he went and made sure that her husband got killed in battle. Um, and then God sent the prophet to yell at him, and he repented. Anyway, Solomon is a son of Bathsheba, and David said he will be the heir, even though he had other sons who are older. Um, so it's not necessarily the oldest son that inherits. Now, Solomon did a lot of good. He started out like his father, didn't finish so strong. So anyway, the first thing that we hear about Solomon is that after he is king and he solidifies his power on the throne, he's given an offering to God in one of the high places. It says here in the Bible in First Kings, and we'll find Solomon's story in First Kings, the first two-thirds of this book. Second Kings tells the story of the other Judean kings that follow Solomon until King Nebuchadnezzar comes from Babylon and wipes them out. Chronicles, which follows kings in the Bible, there's two books of Chronicles. They tell the story of the kings in the northern kingdom of Israel until the Assyrians come and wipe them out. So there's a lot of history in there. And we don't get all the information because it says something like, aren't the rest of his stories written down in the book of the King of Solomon? Or aren't the rest of this of his deeds written down in the books on the kings of Israel? Well, we don't have those books. We don't even have pieces of those books. So anyway, Solomon, his first marriage was to a daughter of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And they brought her to his house, or to David's house, as he was building his own house, his own temple. But the other thing that he was building at that time too, he was building the temple to God. And so we hear in Jesus' time, we hear about the second temple. This was the temple that was started by Nehemiah and Ezra, but King Herod really built it up huge. It was the second temple. The first temple was built by Solomon. And King David really wanted to build this temple for God. And he even purchased land. He purchased this mountaintop from the landowner, so that would be the place where he would build the temple to God. But God told him, you have too much blood on your hands from all the wars that you've been in. Don't build me a temple with your bloody hands. Let your son Solomon build it. And so Solomon did build it. I mean, David piled a lot of stuff so that it would have a good start. And then, Solomon filled it up, finished building it with taxes, with gifts from other kingdoms. gifts from other lands that they had conquered. David had made the kingdom pretty big. I mean, it's not as big as what God had originally promised Abraham, but it's pretty big. Solomon extended those borders to the biggest that it was going to be. But so anyway, after his wedding, he went to one of the high places because you always offer sacrifices to God in a high place. And he went there to a place called Gibeon, and he was sacrificing there because this was the place he usually went to while the temple was being built. And so while he's there, he has a dream. And God comes to him in his dream and just asked him, "What should I give you?" And Solomon says, I mean, he's showing a little wisdom here already. He says, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and in uprightness of heart towards you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love. And you have given him a son to sit on his throne today," meaning him. "And even though I'm a little child, I don't know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they can't be counted or numbered. And so give me an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this, your great people?" Solomon asked for wisdom to be a good ruler. And God recognized that. God says here, it's in chapter 3, I mean, he says, "Because you have asked for this and have not asked anything for yourself, such as long life or riches or, that all your enemies should die before you. You have asked for wisdom to figure out what is right. And so I will give you that wisdom. I will give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall be after you. And I will also give you what you have not asked, riches and honor all your life. No other king will compare with you. And if you walk in my ways like your father David did, then I will lengthen your life." And Solomon woke up. And he came to Jerusalem. He came to where the Ark of the Covenant was, because remember I said David brought the Ark in, and he was like, they had a whole parade coming in, and David was dancing naked before the Ark because he was all excited and full of joy. And of course his wife didn't like that. Anyway, so he brought the Ark into Jerusalem. And so Solomon went to where the Ark was, and he offered some more burnt offerings and sacrifices there. So he asked for wisdom. So that's the first thing we learn about Solomon, that he is a wise person. Wise beyond his years. And, we have other writings of him in the Bible. Ecclesiastes is one of his writings. The Song of Solomon is another one. It's like a love letter that he wrote to Sheba, to the Queen of Sheba. Then he wrote Proverbs. It's a book of sayings, of wise things to remember. It's a good book to read, to remember some of that. So we have those writings, and some of them were written later in life. Ecclesiastes, for sure, was written later in life when he was an old man. So the first story that we hear about Solomon's wisdom is the one about the two mothers. Have you heard this story? You might have heard it in Sunday school. Anyway, two women came to him for judgment. They both had just had babies. And the one woman said, this woman and I, we live in the same house, and we gave birth in that house at the same time, but her son died and she took my son and switched them. And then the other woman said, no, she's lying. This boy is my boy. He's my son. My son didn't die. Her son did. And they were arguing like that before Solomon. And so Solomon says, he says, bring me a sword. And the two women looked at him like, what is going on? Why do you need a sword? And they gave Solomon a sword, and he said, I'm just going to solve this argument. I'll just cut the boy in two. I'll cut the infant in two, and they can each have a half. But the woman whose son was alive, whose boy it really was, said to him, she said, no. Give her the living boy. Do not kill him. And the other one's like, divide the boy. I don't care. So the king responded. Solomon responded. He said, give this boy to the first woman. She is his mother. Because she was willing to give him up in order to save his life. The king knew that she was the real mother. And that's the first story that we have of his wisdom. And people came from all over. Kings came from all over. Other rulers, they sent people to Solomon to ask him questions, to hear his answers, because they knew that he was wiser than any of them. And that was well and good. For a long time, he ruled his kingdom that way. And every time these other kingdoms, they wanted to make an alliance with him, they sent one of their daughters to be married to him, so that they would not only have this written bond, but they would have a bond of blood to hold the peace. And so what happened was, eventually, what it says in the Bible, that he had 700 wives. 700 wives. And 300 concubines. These were mistresses. People that he would sleep with that he wasn't married to. And then there was the one that he really loved, the Queen of Sheba. So he had 1,001 women that he was connected to. 1,001. That's a crowded house. Now, naturally, they didn't all live together. And he probably only saw them all periodically. But you see what happened with Solomon here with all his wisdom. and all that God had given him, he started to believe that it was because of him. It wasn't because of God. He started to believe in his own wisdom, his own power. He started to believe everything that was said about him. And his pride grew. And he started to forget who he was. Not that he was the king of Israel, but that he was a son of David. And that he owed everything to God. And so you can imagine with all these women, and if it was Queen Solomon, it would have been men. But you've got 1,000 people that you need to please and need to keep happy. And he was rich beyond his wildest dreams, so he gave them things to keep them happy. And one thing that they missed, that they wanted, was they wanted to worship their gods. And so Solomon started building these temples and these places where his wives could go and worship their gods. And at times they convinced him to come along. What's the first commandment? I am the Lord your God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Well, Solomon was breaking this commandment in a big way. And you can see, his kingdom started to crumble towards the end of his life. And when he died, his son took over, and you still had the 12 tribes that he was managing. They were one nation, but they were still 12 tribes, 12 peoples. And so some of the people that lived in the northern, what we call the northern kingdom of Israel, they came and they were looking for a break in the taxes. And Solomon's son, Jeroboam, he was young. I think he was 10, 12 years old when he took over power. Maybe he was a little older. But anyway, he was young, and they asked, they asked for breaking the taxes, and then instead of listening to his dad's counselors who told him to give them that break, lighten the yoke that your father put on them, he listened to his own friends who told him to double down. And so that's what he said. He said, if you think my father was harsh, I will be harsher. You think my father had too many taxes, I want double what he was asking from you. And so they broke off. And they split, and there was war between the two nations, between the northern half and the southern half. And the southern half was basically just the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. The other 10 belonged to the northern half. And so the kingdom of Israel split on Solomon's death, and it was never reunited. Eventually, with the different wars that were going on and the different peoples that would come in and take over this territory, those in the northern kingdom were defeated, and they were scattered throughout the known world. And they're known as the lost tribes of Israel. That is Solomon's story. That is Solomon's legacy. He asked for wisdom. He was given wisdom. But soon he didn't follow his own thoughts. He didn't listen to what God had told him. He didn't listen to what his father had told him. He started to believe in himself, and he fell away from God, and the kingdom crumbled. We will move beyond the kings now. When next we meet, we will talk about some of the prophets. But until then, I hope to see you next week in class. But have a blessed week.